Sorry. I took it with me, that camera. Okay. All right. Okay, so based on what we did yesterday, we started talking about mind and mental factors, distinguishing the two, main mind versus mental factors. Um, and we left out some part of it that just talks about the mind. We don't need that. And basically, well, we took this, we discussed the two lines from Maitreya's distinguishing the middle from the extremes, which talks about the main mind as opposed that sees its object. So that is that which sees the object, that which conceives or perceives the object, apprehends the object is the main mind. What sees its attributes, the mental factors. So here there are two interpretations. One is the what sees its attributes. The attributes refer to the functions of the mind in general, so the secondary functions of the main mind, which are the functions that feeling and so forth performs. Therefore, what sees its attribute, its here refers to the mind itself, attributes to the functions. And then there's a second interpretation that reads it slightly differently, as in the attributes refer to the object. Therefore, any mental factor is characterized by perceiving certain attributes of the object. But whichever interpretation we follow, well, we started with the first interpretation, talking about the different functions, and we discussed how the mental factors are just a slightly unusual way of singling out, conceptually singling out certain functions. The function of feeling, for instance, the function of discernment, and so on. That they have their unique functions. From the point of view of singling out these unique functions, we speak of the different mental factors. And from the point of view of singling out the main functions, so the secondary functions are the mental factors, or refer to the mental factors, while the main functions refer to the main mind. Okay. So that's that. We had a lot of discussions about feeling, and it'll come up again today. The last passage I read was from, or the last passage we read was from Yasomitra, or also called Jinaputra, from his clarifying the meaning of the treasury of knowledge. So same basis, object, aspect, time, and substance, which are the five shared features, the five similar, or the shared features that all main minds and mental factors that are accompanying one another, that are associated with one another or concomitant with one another, share. So here, associated, accompanying, concomitant, they're just different English terms for the same word in Tibetan. Okay, so we read that. I think we did. Whatever aspect gives rise to the mind, that very aspect gives rise to feeling, and so on. And yeah, I think we read the whole quote. No, maybe we didn't. Okay. Whatever aspect gives rise to the mind, that very aspect gives rise. So if you look at the quote, it just roughly explains those five shared features, which, as I said before, we'll discuss in more detail, but might as well briefly introduce them. So the basis refers to the uncommon empowering condition or uncommon dominant condition. The object is, well, if you look at it from the point of view object, kind of like the basis, in the case of perceiving a vase to be, I don't know, golden. So the vase here is the object, golden is the aspect. So if you have like X being Y or whatever, so the A being B, so the vase is a product. The vase is golden, for instance. If it's the same, if it's just one object, just the vase, then it's both the object and the aspect. Then it goes on to say, whatever aspect gives rise to the mind, that very aspect gives rise to feeling, and so on. So they all arise in the same aspect, have the same objects, therefore. in that if the mind's aspect is blue, then feeling and so on concomitant with it arise having only the aspect of blue. Again, another way of looking at the aspect, as in like the mind arises in the aspect of blue if blue appears. So this is true for the main mind as well as its concomitant mental factors. And then it says, and at whatever time the mind arises, feeling and so on arise, only at that time. And it doesn't mention substance. Substance is usually explained to mean that you have only one feeling for any kind of mind. There's not like two types of feeling, two types of discernment with a single mental continuum. That's impossible with a single consciousness. For instance, if you have an eye consciousness apprehending a table, it's not like you have two types of discernment concomitant with that mind, or two main minds, or two whatever. There's always just one substance, in the sense there's just a single entity of the main mind and its accompanying or concomitant mental factors. Anyway, that'll be explained later on. Okay, that's the first interpretation from the point of view of the functions. The first interpretation of Maitreya's quote: what sees its attributes, the attributes here are the functions. The second interpretation, as it says on the next page, the second interpretation of the phrase, its attributes, the mental factors, says that the mind cognizes the object itself. And has the main function of the mind is not just to be aware and knowing, but also to cognize the object roughly, just the rough kind of nature of the object, such as what kind of object could it be? A visible form, could be a vase, for instance, sound, the sound of music, and so on. While the mental factors are mainly responsible for cognizing the object's attributes. So, of course, they all cognize the object in general and its attributes, but as to their uncommon, their unique functions that we're focusing on when we talk about each of these minds or mental factors, or main minds or mental factors. In this case, the main mind's function is just to get a rough sense of the object, while the mental factors, they're more specific in what they perceive, which I find quite difficult. I mean, it makes sense when it comes to discernment. Of course, discernment, its main function is to discern certain aspects, certain attributes of the object. In that case, it makes sense. In that sense, you can talk about the discernment focusing on, well, as it says in Maitreya's text, its attributes, the attributes of its object. But doesn't discernment, isn't the main function of discernment also to discern its general nature? You could debate. I mean, discerning the general nature. That is the main function of the main mind, as it says here. And then discernment is more like more details about the object. But yeah, anyway, so that's one thing to look at. One thing you could debate, again, how far is the discernment only responsible for attributes? I mean, just being a vase itself is an attribute of a vase. So that is that cognition or becoming aware of just being a vase, is that the main function of the main mind or of the mental factors? And then contact and attention, like which attributes of the object do they cognize that is their main function in terms of cognition, and that is not the main function of discernment, for instance? Like attention. Like attention pays attention to certain aspects, but it's mainly discernment, the main responsibility of which is to become aware of specific attributes. So is there something that the discernment is mainly aware of, but attention is not? And is there something that attention is mainly aware of, but I'm saying mainly aware of, so mainly aware of, but that discernment is not? It doesn't make sense to me. I have no answer to this. Okay, but anyway, let's go reading. So the second interpretation of the phrase, its attribute, the mental factor, says that the mind cognizes the object itself, such as a visible form, sound, and so on, while the mental factors cognize the object's attributes. The meaning of the object itself and its attributes is as follows. A visible form, for example, let's take the table, is the object itself. That visible form's size, attractiveness, and so on are the object's attributes. Likewise, a sound is an object itself, and its melodiousness or harshness, and so on, are its attributes. So being melodious or harsh. Now here the following explanation is just from the point of view of being pleasant or not, attractive or not. So the 6 types of consciousness that perceive the object itself are main minds. Okay, so the 6 kinds of objects, the 5 sense consciousnesses and the mental consciousness. Here we talk about the 6 types of primary consciousness, of course. The 6 types of primary consciousness or main mind that perceive the object itself are main minds. So eye consciousness, primary consciousness that apprehends a table, for instance, it perceives just table. Okay. The 51 mental factors, such as feeling, that perceives the object attributes, such as attractiveness or unattractiveness, the perception of which gives rise to pleasant or unpleasant state, and so on, are mental factors. Oh, here it's saying feeling is responsible mainly for perceiving attributes such as attractiveness and unattractiveness. And again, it's aware of them, right? It says perceiving, aware. Now, every time you perceive something, you perceive it as unattractive, as attractive, or neutral. No, I mean, that would be really weird. Like, you cannot just have a simple eye consciousness perceiving table. Okay, so if it's just table, then it would be neutral. And if it's a table that you like, it would be a table that is attractive, or is it just an attractive table? But table and attractive table are, I mean, Venerable Teacher wouldn't agree, but I would say are synonymous, right? So an attractive table, an unattractive table. I mean, of course we can debate that, and we did to some extent yesterday, but actually, and I'm just saying what is in the text, or what is usually indicated in the text, is that long, short, beautiful, not beautiful, they're all synonymous. Not in relation to someone or something, of course not. Then they are contradictory. However, in general, being good, being bad, it's or being at least beautiful or not. Of course, it's very subjective, but then everything is subjective, so no big deal when it comes to that. Therefore, when you perceive a vase, you perceive an attractive vase, just as you perceive an impermanent vase, without being aware that it's impermanent. So what I'm trying to say is, like, when you have an eye consciousness apprehending vase, you have an eye consciousness apprehending impermanent vase. An eye consciousness apprehending a vase apprehends an impermanent vase because the vase is impermanent. There's no difference between an impermanent vase and vase. Now, if a vase is, for instance, if let's say we agree it's attractive, non-attractive, and neutral, all 3 of them, then you perceive such a vase that is all 3 of them, like an attractive, non-attractive, and neutral vase, because they're the same. But then in what way does your feeling perceive the attractiveness and not the non-attractiveness, which gives rise to a pleasant feeling? I have no answer. I can debate it, but I don't know how to answer that. That's why the second interpretation, I find that a little difficult. That there are certain mental factors, again, like discernment, being responsible for discerning, for distinguishing particular attributes of the vase, for instance. Yes, I can agree with that. But about the attractiveness or unattractiveness when it comes to feeling, okay, I know in English attractive and unattractive are not good words, but I mean, they're weird words. You don't use them for vases and tables, but it's for a lack of having a better word. Because already beneficial has been used, pleasant has been used, as you'll see just in the next sentences. So, okay, attractive as in like appealing. Well, maybe appealing is better rather than attractive. Attractive, like a woman or a man could be attractive, but I think appealing may be better. Anyway, so here the word is attractive. It's yidoon, yidomyo in Tibetan. And in Tibetan, it can be really used for anything that you think is nice. Okay, so the 51 mental factors, such as feeling, that perceive the object's attributes, such as attractiveness and unattractiveness, the perception of which gives rise to pleasant or unpleasant states, and so on, are mental factors. Yeah, so, okay, the mind experiences pleasure. Again, the question is experiencing pleasure, we are aware that there's a pleasant sensation. So, does the eye consciousness also apprehend the eye consciousness apprehending a vase? Does it apprehend pleasure? Because otherwise, how do we know later on, oh, when I saw that, I was so pleased? Or is the eye consciousness always neutral and it's actually the mental consciousness? But there's nothing in the text that suggests that the eye consciousness has to, that the feeling associated or concomitant with the primary consciousness apprehending vase, for instance, the primary eye consciousness apprehending vase, that is always neutral. Neutral in the sense we talk about, it's never virtuous or non-virtuous. Sense consciousness is always neutral in the sense that it's neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. Okay, that is very clear. However, there's nothing that suggests that you can't have an eye consciousness that experiences a pleasant feeling. Therefore, every eye consciousness is associated with pleasure, displeasure, or a neutral feeling, and that is experienced, and we're aware of it. Thus, is that the engaged object? And they say, no, 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 it's experienced, not perceived. But then, what's the difference? Right? It's experienced, but not perceived. Again, plenty of debates. You can debate a lot about this. So, pardon?
So,
Yeah.
sense consciousness also do have the five omnipresent mental factors, no?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Every mind, whether
Yeah.
sense or mental, has the five omnipresent mental factors, yes. So you have an eye consciousness. Mental consciousness slightly easier, but mental consciousness experiences pleasure. For instance, I don't know, when you're lost somewhere in a crowd and you suddenly see your father. Remember, Lati Rinpoche said very clearly, you recognize your father. The eye consciousness knows it's the body of your father, which means that's probably a good example of a feeling of pleasure. Oh, my dad, right? As a child, like you get lost and there's panic and fear, you lost your parents, and then suddenly you see your dad. That would be, I guess, an example of an eye consciousness apprehending your father. So that is a concomitant with pleasure. But again, is that pleasure? How is it experienced? It's not perceived, it's not apprehended. How do you know later on that you were so relieved when you saw your father? Okay. Difficult.
Right.
But that is.
I'm
Pardon?
curious, wouldn't that eye consciousness actually send the message to the mental consciousness for that to have registered, oh, this is my father, how fortunate? Because, I mean, the
Well,
eye consciousness, yeah.
remember what Lhasa Rinpoche says in 19 Tibetan Buddhism. He very clearly says that even the eye consciousness recognizes your father. And in that context, I also mentioned that there are two views. Now, I just followed Lhasa Rinpoche because it's in the book.
Okay, thank you.
So there's the view that some would totally disagree and say, no, no, you never. That is a mental consciousness, like function of knowing that this is this and this, right? Like this is a vase, this is a table, this is my father. That's what the mental consciousness does. The mental consciousness thinks, yes, it is. Is the camera screwed? No.
No, no.
So, that's what the mental consciousness thinks. But the eye consciousness, according to some, does perceive it is this, it is that. Anyway, even if it didn't, so let's say we don't agree with that, still there's pleasure. And how's that pleasure experienced?
Is it not possible to just hold the position that it does have the five omnipresent mental factors, but in case of a sense consciousness, feeling is just always neutral?
Yeah, but then it would, I mean, for instance, when it comes to virtuous and non-virtuous, the texts are very clear that it can never be virtuous or non-virtuous. But why wouldn't that be mentioned anywhere? Why wouldn't that be emphasized in the same way? But it isn't, and it's usually accepted that there is pleasure associated with. I mean, definitely the texts are very clear that there is a pleasant feeling. I mean, it even says not only does it not deny that there is. It actually gives kind of 5 types of feelings, as in like associated with the I think it's 5.
I
I'm
know
trying.
fear.
Yeah, I know. I mean, like, no, not in that way. Like, associated with the sense consciousness and associated with the mental consciousness. Oh, no,
Right.
sorry. There are 5 types of feelings. Some are physical, so those 2 are out. But then you have, those are not included. But then you have mental feelings, and one of them is, no, I'm getting confused. No, physical feelings, and those are associated, yeah, again, it's talking about physical feelings which are associated with the sense consciousnesses. So they're described as pleasant and unpleasant physical feelings. Again, those can only be the feelings associated with the sense consciousnesses. And then you have pleasant and unpleasant mental feelings. Those are associated with the mental consciousness. And then you have neutral feeling, which encompasses or which includes all physical feelings and mental feelings. Does that make sense? So you have 5 categories, and I think they'll be mentioned as part of this explanation. So one more time, you have 5 types of feelings. Pleasant and unpleasant feeling associated with the sense consciousnesses, which includes the eye consciousness and so on. And then you have 2 types of feeling, pleasant and unpleasant, associated with the mental consciousness. And then you have the category of neutral feelings, which is just mentioned as one category, but does include neutral feelings associated with the sense consciousnesses and the mental consciousness. Therefore, it's very clear, definitely pleasant. Okay. So, I mean, we discussed this before. The sense consciousnesses are not as passive as we may believe. Therefore, there could be pleasure. But maybe that pleasure is just experienced but not apprehended, and it's only the mental consciousness that actually ascertains that. It's only the mental consciousness that can then later on give back to or give rise to the memory. Oh, there was a pleasant feeling. It's not that the eye consciousness itself is apprehends the pleasure, it just experiences it. That's usually what they say. That's usually how they put it. So the eye consciousness experiences pleasure but doesn't perceive it. You see, we're so used to saying, oh, something is it appears, something is apprehended. And it seems if something is experienced in the form of like pleasure, then it should also be apprehended. But that's definitely not the case, because it's an eye consciousness. It doesn't apprehend pleasure. So it would be the mental consciousness doing so. Maybe that's acceptable.
Yashima,
Yes.
When you eat something tasty,
Yes.
it's definitely that consciousness that experiences it and
Yeah.
apprehends it. Wouldn't it because you immediately spit out bitter food, for example. It's almost instantaneous.
Yes, but the question is, are you experiencing food as delicious when there's an experience? Yeah, maybe you do. So it's not just apprehending, I don't know, toast or whatever. You're apprehending toast as delicious, but that's not an object of an eye consciousness. An eye consciousness main object is a visual object. Toast being delicious is not a visual object. No, sorry.
I'm talking about the taste concept.
Not visual.
I'm talking about the tongue concept.
It's not a tongue. Yeah. Sorry, I said visual object. That was my mistake. No, but a tongue consciousness apprehending toast. It doesn't apprehend toast as delicious, because toast being delicious is not a taste. Toast itself is apprehended. But then we can go back to delicious toast, and it would also be non-delicious and neutral. It's very difficult. This one is really difficult.
I feel like body consciousness is a helpful way to think about it for me.
The body consciousness, in what way?
Yeah.
When you're really cold and suddenly it's warm?
Or experiencing different textures.
Oh, yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
It seems like, to me, it's
better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that texture, is it apprehended as pleasant, or is there just a pleasant experience of the mind that apprehends softness.
Yeah, I don't think it can apprehend, but pleasant
Right.
experience
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah. It's good that you have that. Yes. So Tripti's example works. Your example also works. I mean, from our own experience, if we've been really hungry, for instance, then that first bite of food tastes so blissful, doesn't it? I mean, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was once asked, what is his favorite food? And His Holiness said, the food I eat when I'm most hungry. And that is so true. If you haven't eaten for days, a dry piece of bread tastes blissful. So, and the point is, we do all have experience of that first bite being totally blissful, or of like soft clothes, or even like right now you're in a place where it doesn't look that cold to look at you right now. Yesterday you looked colder, but so when it's really, really cold and then you stand in the sun and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
right? It's definitely a pleasant experience. Yeah.
But like, if you touch a hot stove, it's an immediate response, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Immediately. You're
Like,
right.
ooh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you would argue that there is the motivation to pull away your hand. There's
Yeah.
definitely a mental consciousness there. I mean, if we have a mental consciousness that we need to be breathing, which seems the most instinctive thing there is, to stay upright. Remember, we had that discussion, like, you know, if I now fall asleep, then I fall over. Plus, then, if you touch a hot plate, then you pull away. That's your mental consciousness. But there's still, you pull away. Why? Because there's an unpleasant feeling. Otherwise, the mental yeah, exactly. Yeah. So as Janine says, yeah, absolutely. Great. Okay, so just that discussion maybe just helpful to get a better sense. And yeah, so we just experience it, but we don't apprehend the pleasure. But let's agree on, of course, the pleasure is apprehended by the mental consciousness, which is induced right away, and therefore we have memory of perceiving something pleasant. Okay. So here we go back to this attractiveness and unattractiveness when it comes to feeling. Here it says very clearly, feeling perceives the object's attributes such as attractiveness and unattractiveness. So here it's really saying it is perceiving attractiveness. That's not a visual object. Okay. For example, when the visual consciousness apprehends a visible form, its accompanying feeling apprehends its qualities. Here it's very clear, such as whether it is beneficial or harmful. Discernment apprehends the object's distinguishing mark. Being beneficial or harmful are also the distinguishing mark. But okay, we could argue, no, that's not a distinguishing mark. It's a characteristic, but not something that distinguishes it from everything else. Okay, to which various classificatory conventions will be applied. Okay, so a distinguishing mark. So based on the object's discernment, we then apply certain conventions, such as a table or vase and so forth. Okay. Contact apprehends the form's attributes such as pleasant and unpleasant. Attachment and hatred. Yes, please.
So is this is sort of implying that there's a discernment of an object before we apply the mark, the conception, the
Yes.
conceptual designation.
Let me just finish that, because that's what it seems like. That's exactly what it seems like. It seems like not just with discernment, but it's also with all the other ones. There seems to be a sequence. So how can they be omnipresent? So let me just quickly finish this, and it'll become more obvious when we go through all of them. But yes, exactly, it seems that way. But there's an answer to that. To which various classificatory contact apprehends the form's attributes such as pleasant or unpleasant, attachment and hatred apprehends it as attractive, unattractive, and so on. Now, the last sentence I don't think I can agree to. Attractive as an exaggerated version of attractive and unattractive, because if attachment and hatred apprehended its object as merely attractive or unattractive and so on, it would not be a wrong consciousness. So I've got the WhatsApp contact of the person who composed this book, or parts of them. He asked me, if you have a question, just send me a message. I haven't done that yet because it's going to take back and forth and debate yet, and I thought never mind for now. It gives a lot to debate. It gives a lot to think about. It's not always helpful when everything is answered right away. I personally believe this person was not literally thinking attractive and unattractive as in like a realistic sense, but in this exaggerated sense. I have to double check. But for the time being, yeah, it gives us the opportunity to reflect on this more closely. So what it's saying here, it seems like you go from you have attractive, which is feeling. Oh no, beneficial or harmful. No, feeling. Previously it talked about the attractiveness that is perceived by feeling, but then it talks about when you perceive an object, the feeling apprehends qualities whether it's beneficial or harmful. And then contact apprehends attributes such as pleasant or unpleasant. Okay, so feeling, you have feeling and you have contact. So what comes first? First, I guess, beneficial. Right, I mean, what comes first? Actually, here it seems first it's beneficial or harmful and then pleasant. But beneficial doesn't necessarily mean something is pleasant. I mean, going to the dentist is beneficial. I wouldn't call that pleasant. So, or having surgery and so forth. So what do you mean, like beneficial or harmful? This is not what is in the scriptures. This is what a particular Geshe wrote. And they've wrote this in order for people who don't have the same background in Lorig that you guys have. Though I'm not sure they all understand that if you have no background, but never mind. So that was done. So it's not always I think it's open for interpretation. I think it's possible to interpret it. There are texts. That's why in a lot of the textbooks you have what's called the general meaning and the decisive analysis. Have you ever heard of this description of textbooks? Well, for instance, in Dörpenloseling, the textbooks that are used are by someone called Benjamin Sonandakba, as you probably heard by now. Or in Sarah J, they use Jetsun Shogi Jansen. And both textbook authors, usually they have, like, depending on the topic, but let's say Pachin, there's a book called General Meaning, at least Benjamin Sonandakba for sure. There's a general meaning and there's a decisive analysis. The general meaning describes, well, what the title suggests, gives you a general explanation. And some of what is in that general explanation is contradicted by the second book, which is called the decisive analysis. In there, the author is very precise. In the first book, General Meaning, the definition may be given that is kind of comprehensive, like in the sense you can easily understand it. It kind of makes sense. It gives you a good sense of what this particular definiendum is all about. But then that same definition is actually refuted in the decisive analysis, where it's very precise, so that there's no contradictions when it comes to debate. You see? So here this text is more like a general meaning. Some things may be generally explained and there's room for interpretation. So instead of saying attachment and hatred apprehend something as attractive, well, it should be in an exaggerated attractive way, and so on. And there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, this is really what the author means. I mean, that should be what the author means, just from the previous and the later explanations, that this definitely can be interpreted this way. Okay, so that's kind of the purpose of this book anyway. It's not a decisive analysis where everything is clear and like, this cannot be right, this cannot be right. Okay, now let's look at it. Beneficial and pleasant. So it's not saying anything that's beneficial is pleasant and whatever is pleasant is beneficial. That's not what he's saying. But he's talking in general about this particular object where it happens to be pleasant and beneficial at the same time. Something is beneficial and pleasant at the same time, or harmful and unpleasant. Okay. So again, now Venerable Tekchok's question, what like, it seems like, yes, discernment comes first, but then you could argue, isn't it contact first? Because usually you make contact, but then again, isn't it the attention that moves the mind towards the object? Remember, we discussed it briefly, but they'll also be defined later on. So contact, it was briefly mentioned before, it was turned to the object, and I said, well, the Tibetan word is moved to, but whichever verb you use, attention No, sorry, not attention. Intention. Sorry, I said attention, but I meant intention. Intention, or volition, sometimes called volition, is that mental factor that moves the mind towards the object. That seems to be the first step. And then you make contact. And then there's discernment. And then there is, making contact. No, then there's attention, because you need to be attentive enough to actually discern anything. And only then is feeling. So it seems intention, move the mind to the object. Contact, attention, stay with the object. Discernment, feeling. But it's actually said that the functions are always there, but whether they're fully performed is a different matter. But you see, like sometimes you have a function there, but this function is not performed. Let me give you an example. We've probably heard that even a Buddha has bodhicitta. It would be absurd to say a Buddha doesn't have bodhicitta. But what is bodhicitta? Bodhicitta is described as a main mind concomitant with the aspiration to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. Why would a Buddha aspire to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings if he's already enlightened? So that's one of the debates, comes up right away when you study the awakening mind, Semkye in Tibetan, or you study about bodhicitta, which pretty much comes at the beginning of Pachin. So it's one of the debates. Oh, the Buddha doesn't have. Oh, yes, the Buddha has bodhicitta. The Buddha has aspiration, but the function is there, but it's not performed. So it's not like the Buddha is sitting there, oh, may I become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. That aspiration doesn't even arise, but the mental function is still present. And therefore it qualifies to be called bodhicitta. I mean, of course, for other reasons as well, but yeah, it's definitely saying the function is there. Now, sometimes when you have the omnipresent factors, let's say they're all active at the same time. They are, but some are stronger sometimes than the others. If you're really attentive, or there's a strong discernment. So there's definitely a difference between the different strength, right? So, like I said, very strong feeling, very, very strong feeling, and the other ones are less pronounced. Strong discernment. If you really want to figure out what's going on, specifically like when you engage in analysis, then your discernment is very active. Now we can already see there's different levels of strength. But then you could argue that they're all active to a certain degree. Yeah, you make contact, you move towards the object, all this is happening, but there's a sequence in terms of their strength, right? I've had some teachers who would, and not everyone agrees, but it's obvious that, and later on it does say, sometimes a person is defined by a particular mental factor. If their faith, for instance, this would of course be only concomitant with a mental consciousness. Faith doesn't arise concomitant with an eye consciousness, with a sense consciousness. But let's take a mental consciousness. So it says later on, some people are defined by the strength of some of their mental factors. If they have a very strong, very strongly functioning faith, then they're described as a faithful person. I'm a person having faith. Or if they have a very strong aspiration, then they're described as someone with a purpose. If they have great discernment, then may be called an intelligent person, and so forth. Therefore, there is definitely different degrees of strength with that kind of sequence. Like I said, moving towards the object, okay, intention is stronger in that moment. But the other functions, they're still there. But then you could argue, well, anger could still be there, it's just not functioning. So is anger omnipresent? Or let's leave aside anger, because anger doesn't arise with the sense consciousnesses. But there are mental factors that arise with the sense consciousnesses. Let me try to think of something that arises with the sense consciousness other than the 5 omnipresent. To go back, I don't remember now which one it is, but anyway, so let's say there is definitely other ones. So are they also omnipresent? They might not be active like there, but the function is there. Yeah,
like
so
mindfulness?
Mindfulness, no, I don't think there's an eye consciousness associated with mindfulness. No, that's a
Observant?
virtuous state.
Or, yeah, observe. Like
Pardon?
observant, would that be?
Can you say that again?
Observant?
Observance. What do you mean with observance?
Observant, like somebody who's very focused on, like seeing things and noticing like details.
That's attention.
Okay.
Yeah, that's attention. And anyway, usually, like, there are more than 51 mental factors, but usually you would choose one of the 51. Yeah, I need to go back to them, but I don't have them right now in front of me, so I can't think of another one. But of course, there are other ones as well. Okay, but anyway, yeah, so this part here is definitely debatable when it comes to which one comes first or not, and when it comes to contact. I mean, feeling makes more sense, that it perceives something as beneficial or harmful. I would actually say that it's feeling that apprehends something as pleasant or unpleasant. But in a way, it's like first you perceive something as pleasant and then as beneficial or as attractive. I don't know. Anyway, so parts of this, of course, is based on Asanga, Arya Asanga's levels of yogic deeds, where he says here any painful, pleasant, or neutral characteristics are cognized by contact. Any beneficial, harmful, or neutral characteristics are cognized by feeling. Any characteristic that is the distinguishing mark for classificatory convention is cognized by discernment. Okay, discernment is the third one. So maybe there's the subtle degree of all of them active, but one is more prevalent, and that's where the sense of sequence comes in. I guess you have to say that. So they're all active, but to a subtler kind of degree, versus other ones that are not at all active. Yeah, painful, pleasant, and neutral are cognized by contact. So it seems to be there's a bit of a progression. First it's just painful, pleasant, or neutral, and then it goes from there to beneficial and harmful. So beneficial as in, like, if it's pleasant, especially with the self-centeredness, if it's pleasant, it must be beneficial. So you want it. Because as we know, these feelings for an ordinary person give rise to the three kinds of afflictions: anger, attachment, and ignorance. So if someone with the ignorance, it may seem a little bit like, it makes sense. If someone is pleasant, I generate attachment. When someone is unpleasant, I generate resentment or anger. If they're neutral, it gives rise to ignorance. Well, you kind of ignore them in that sense, although the Tibetan word is not really used that way. But it's kind of like you don't care. You ignore them. You're like, I don't want anything to know about them. So ignorance in the sense of, like, you just don't want anything to do with them, like not wanting to know anything. Not ignorance as in, like, root ignorance kind of ignorance. Ignorance can also sometimes mean just not knowing, or just almost like an indifference, I guess. Like when we talk about the 5 views and the 5 non-views, the 5 non-views, they're obviously just wrong views, perceiving the opposite what is there. While ignorance that is part of the views is none of these views, that is part of the non-views, is none of the views described before. It's just a not knowing. It's just a not knowing. So kind of like just not knowing the alphabet, or not knowing this, that, and so forth. So here ignorance is used in a way that we also usually use it in daily life. I was just so ignorant of the situation, I just didn't know. So it's not a view as such. And in this context, it would also make sense. I just ignore that person. I don't care. I don't want anything to know about them, kind of idea. Anyway, having said all this, it makes sense, therefore, that there is this progression. Okay, first seen as pleasant, unpleasant. That's part of contact. Then giving rise to feeling becoming more prevalent after contact has done what I just said, like distinguish between pleasant and unpleasant. So you could have that progression, and that of course then can give rise to a mental factor of attachment or anger, etc. But the question is still, how do they cognize it? That's still a question that remains. Or they're not, but they're talking about an eye consciousness or visual consciousness, so don't know. While Asanga doesn't say visual consciousness. Asanga doesn't talk about visual consciousness. The authors do, but Ayur Asanga just says here any pleasant pain are cognized by contact. All right, so it could be talking just about a mental consciousness. You see, so just using logic, what could it be? And in the end, if there's no real answer, well, let's debate it. And sometimes really just debating it, things become clear. Yeah, it's almost like you have a tiny torch and then it becomes stronger. You know, like the ones that you what do you call it? You
Wind it up.
You wind them up. Yeah, the ones that you wind up, it's like initially it's not much, and then you keep debating and debating, and things are like, oh, it becomes clearer. That's the beauty about debate. Yeah. So anyway, I hope I didn't confuse you more, but the way I was trained when there were a lot of debates, I loved it. I mean, lots of questions. Never mind. I was so used to having questions. Anyway, I was like one of those students. I was one of those who did always what you're not supposed to do. When I first became a nun, I wanted to be a Milarepa, so I went to meditate. I'd get up in the morning at 3 to meditate, and then by 5 I was so tired I went to sleep again. So that didn't work out. And I did that for a few months, and I was like, oh no, I should study. So, you know, and very embarrassingly, I came down the mountain again. And then I joined the IBD, but I didn't know Tibetan. I had just taken a few classes on debate, so I couldn't talk to my classmates. I could only debate with them. So to say that I'm so used to being confused is not an exaggeration. What is the teacher talking about? He's making a joke. Like, please don't make a joke. Please debate. Because I don't understand you. Yeah, so at that time the IBD wasn't as strict. Maybe they started becoming stricter after I was their student. They made a rule you have to know Tibetan after I showed up. Anyway, and it took me a really long time. It felt like a really long time learning Tibetan because I had to learn everything else and memorize with my classmates. So after 2 years I was thinking, I hope I don't die now. I don't want to die. I have to do it all over again. But anyway, the point is that, yeah, I was so used to having questions. So the thing is, therefore, I loved when there were some juicy bits of debate. It was like, wow, it felt so rewarding. I could now debate without running out of any debate. So that was always good. So this feels like that kind of passage here. Okay. What time is it? Okay. So that's the quote anyway. And there's just a lot to think about at your own time or maybe in exchange with someone else. I mean, that's the beauty. You have one mind, it's great. Having two minds is always better. And every mind that is added adds more to our understanding. So, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I think, 9, half. See, half a person.
So many minds.
So many minds, incredible. So many new ideas, potentially, you know, I mean, potentially rising in our mind based on everyone's ideas. Okay. Thus, according to either of the two explanations, the way in which a single mind has significantly different accompanying mental factors should not be understood in the manner of a king surrounded by an entourage of many different ministers. So having said this, these two explanations, especially based on the first explanation, it's obvious that this analogy doesn't work in the literal sense that there's the main mind over there and the mental factors over here, as in like they're totally separate, they're of a different substance, or they're substantially different. No, we're talking about the same mind. Yes, and then when it comes to the different attributes of the object, well, it's not that obvious, but then again, actually what one mind apprehends, the rest apprehends, but the reason they apprehend it has to do with particular mental factors. Yeah. So far, is this all clear, or do you have any questions? No? Okay. Well, there's always time. You can always ask. Also, if something comes up spontaneously. For it says in a sutra, the consciousness of sentient beings occur as distinct individual streams of awareness. Now here, this quote is very famous. It's given a lot. It's helpful here to read the end note. I mean, there are often end notes, and I didn't pay attention to them. At least not, well, I read them on my own, but I didn't mention them in class. But this one I think is important here. So I'll just read it. Although this sutra quotation is very well known, we do not find its source identified in any commentary. So we don't know where it's from, in other words. In some contexts, it reads, sentient beings each have a single stream of consciousness. Whereas in other contexts, one finds there's no time and no place where two primary consciousnesses occur together at the same time. Now, the first one, okay, yes, sentient beings each have a single stream of consciousness. That doesn't mean that there's only one consciousness, but talking about mind in general, which includes the sense consciousnesses and the mental consciousness, my continuum of mind is not yours. Or to be more precise, my eye consciousness is not can never become your eye consciousness. My ear consciousness can never become yours, and so on. So looking at mind in the singular, just every person has a mind. Although that's like not a mind, there are many minds actually, but never mind. So that's a different continuum. That's one way of looking at it. The second version is also, this is another way of interpreting this quote, and depending on the context, it is used to indicate either the first or the second. So the second is there's no time and no place where two primary consciousnesses occur together at the same time. But here, usually that is explained to mean there's no place or there's no time or place where two primary consciousnesses that are of a similar type occur together at the same time. So there's no two types of primary eye consciousnesses arising in my continuum. Although I have two eyes, it's not like I have the eye consciousness of my right eye and the eye consciousness of my left eye, so I need two eye consciousnesses, or the same with my ears. No, that's of course not, that doesn't happen. So we only ever have one primary eye consciousness, not two at the same time, and that's what the meaning of this quote is. So there's no time and no place where two primary consciousnesses occur together at the same time, which is why it's saying that these are all one mind. I mean, when we talk about the mental factors and the main minds, it's not like you have all these mental continua, like the ministers, each being a different mental continuum. No, there's only 6 mental continua, therefore one primary consciousness for each, and then one feeling for each, one discernment for each, and so on. Okay. Therefore, this last quote, that's cited a lot, but usually people say there's no time and no place where two primary consciousnesses of a similar type occur together at the same time. Okay. Likewise, exposition of valid cognition says two conceptual consciousnesses are never observed together. So, in one person's mental continuum, of course. We don't have two mental conceptual consciousnesses. I mean, of course, they're part of, you have, if there were, for instance, feeling was separate from the primary mind, then you have at least, and they're both conceptual, then you have two conceptual consciousnesses. But since it's one mind, there's no fault in saying you have feeling that's conceptual, you have discernment that's conceptual, there's a primary mind that's conceptual, because they're really just one mind. Okay. So to view the mind and its concomitant mental factors as substantially different would contradict many such passages that recur again and again in the sutras and the shastras, or in the treatises, the Indian treatises. One might ask, well then, how does one main mind have diverse accompanying mental factors? When we look at a single flower, for example, we have to posit a general mental experience in relation to it. This basic awareness of the object is the main mind. Again, going back to the previous explanation, it's just this thing in general. There's then a feeling that arises simultaneously with it, which experiences, here it says experience, it doesn't say apprehend, which experiences a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sensation. Yeah, this is how it's always, so this previous is a little bit on the former page, I mean just that explanation given just above Asangas, Arya Asangas level in yogic deeds. That is a little bit unusual and definitely something to debate on. However, now this explanation is the typical, the kind of classic explanation. Feeling experiences, not apprehends, experiences pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sensation. Discernment distinguishes the attributes of the object, such as this is blue and that is yellow. Intention. I've been so undecided about intention or volition. Both words are totally inappropriate. But we don't have any other. I mean, we don't really have a word that is better, because intention implies making a concerted effort. Volition does the same. But this is an automatic response of any kind of mind. So I guess we just have to get used to defining intention, not in the sense of like a motivation. Oh, I have the intention to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, that kind of making an effort, especially in our case where Buddhist doesn't arise spontaneously, so we have to make an effort. It's more like this the mind just does it automatically, instinctively, and here we call it intention. Or I mean, I did a little bit of investigation on the two terms, what they actually mean. Volition is stronger, however, it has more of a sense that it can arise automatically versus intention. So that's why I usually prefer volition, but they're pretty similar. Yeah, so I guess it's important to understand here intention does not mean motivation, doesn't mean you make an effort to generate the intention to do such and such. The mind just does it automatically. Intention moves the mind and the mental factors toward the object, just as a magnetic stone, it literally says a magnetic stone, so a magnet, they talk about magnetic stones, moves iron. It's an unusual expression in English, I guess, a magnet, but yeah, in Tibetan it does say do kablen. Attention directs the mind to a specific object among several objects of the mind. So what does it mean here? Attention directs the mind to a specific object among several objects of the mind. Does anyone have a suggestions? So there are many objects of the mind. Let's take an eye consciousness. There are many objects of the mind. Attention directs the mind. So in other words, the eye consciousness has many objects, and attention directs that eye consciousness to a specific object. What does that mean?
It focuses on one object.
So it focuses on one object. So give me an example.
Like right now, I can see the whole room, but I'm focused on your image.
Okay, so is the whole room the object of your eye consciousness?
I think so. Because it appears, right?
Very good. That's it. Very good. That's exactly it. So attention directs the mind to a specific engaged object among several objects, appearing objects. So usually you say these appearing objects, they all appear, but they're not engaged. So the mind, although the mind itself is not an inattentive perception or an indeterminate perception, it is an indeterminate or inattentive perception with regard to everything that appears to it, but the mind is not engaged with. Right? Does that make sense? Great.
So sorry. So what is the object of engagement then?
What is the object of engagement again? Well, Tripti just gave in that case, like Tripti's case, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Tripti just said she's looking at the front of the room, I guess, and I suppose there's a wall there behind this me. I was going to say behind me. Behind the image that reflects my face. So all that is the appearing object of Tripti. I mean, the screen and everything. That's all the appearing object. But her attention is responsible for her focusing on only my face, which means the appearing object are the frame, are the wall just behind, and so forth. But the engaged object is only my face. unless you become destructive and she's thinking, oh, there's a stain on the frame, there's a stain on that screen, and like wandering off and paying attention to other things as it does. But yeah, when you're attentive and you want to look at just my face, or it's not my face actually, it's just a reflection on my face to be more precise, but never mind. So yes, then that would be an example where the appearing object is a lot more objects, but the engaged object is my face, or what appears on the screen, and that is due to the attention that this is possible. That the attention directs the mind to that object.
So
Great.
attention is the one that determines what the engaged object is in all cases.
I would say so. I would say so. Pretty much. Yeah, Gonzalo, you put that really nicely. I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, what you want to actually apprehend. Yeah, that would make sense. Great. So let's finish here, and we'll see you again. I'll see you again on Monday. Let's do the dedication.
Having investigated and all day and night through the four reasonings, mind born of reflection on these topics of contemplation, may this discernment sever all doubts.
All right. Thank you very much, and have a lovely weekend.
Thank
Y'all have some pleasant, unpleasant, neutral food in McClark. Okay. Bye.